Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Retro Hardware. Today we're going to talk about the SuperGrafx system from NEC. Now, we've covered the PC-Engine / TurboGrafx 16 in a previous episode. The SuperGrafx was actually designed to be the successor for the popular PC-Engine in Japan. In fact, it was rumored that the SuperGrafx was going to be called the PC-Engine 2, and it was going to be a true 16-bit system. When it finally came out, it was actually only a modest upgrade over the PC-Engine, so it was more of a PC-Engine 1.5. The SuperGrafx came out in Japan in 1989, mainly as a competitor to the upcoming Super Famicom / Super Nintendo. When the Super Famicom finally came out, NEC was actually surprised that the PC Engine was still holding its own, so subsequently it dropped support of the SuperGrafx and continued to support the PC Engine. In the end, only 5 exclusive games were released for the SuperGrafx, and 2 hybrid titles were released. Now these hybrid titles could be played both on the SuperGrafx and the PC Engine, but when you played them on the SuperGrafx, you get less video flicker because of the superior video capabilities of the SuperGrafx. Here's what the SuperGrafx system looks like. I really like the logo. It's also got a really unique case design. Kind of reminds me of those credit card imprinters. Maybe, a little bit. Here's the cartridge slot on the SuperGrafx. Actually, the SuperGrafx played games on cards called Hue cards, which were the same size as the PC Engine games. You could also play the PC Engine games using this system. They were backwards compatible. Over here is the expansion port where you could slide in a CD-ROM attachment. So with this configuration, you could play all the SuperGrafx titles, all the PC Engine titles, and all the PC Engine CD titles, which was over 700 games. Let's talk about the 5 exclusive games for the SuperGrafx. We're going to go in order of release date. So first off, we have Battle Ace, which was the launch title for the SuperGrafx. Battle Ace is a shooter which is reminiscent of the Sega game Afterburner, only this game has an inside the cockpit perspective. Next up, we have Grand Sort, which is a side-scrolling platformer. Some say this is an unofficial sequel to the TurboGrafx 16 pack-in game, Keith Courage and Alpha Zones, but it's actually based on a 41-episode anime. Next, we have probably the most famous game for the SuperGrafx, Daimakamura, or better known as Ghouls and Ghosts. Now, the SuperGrafx port of Ghouls and Ghosts is constantly compared to the Sega Genesis port to boast about the SuperGrafx superior capabilities. Here's a side-by-side comparison of the 2 ports. Next up, we have Aldines, a side-scrolling shooter. I really like Aldines. It's got some great tunes, great use of parallax, almost reminds me of a Konami game. And finally, the last and probably most rare game for the SuperGrafx was 1941 Counterattack, a port of the Capcom shooter. And that's it for all the exclusive titles for the SuperGrafx. Now, there were 2 hybrid titles that you could also play on the PC Engine, but when you played them on the SuperGrafx, they would have no flicker. These 2 hybrid titles were Darius Alpha and Darius Plus. Darius Alpha is a boss-only version of Darius Plus. It's quite rare and super expensive when it actually pops up on eBay. Rumor has it only 800 copies were released. Now the only way to get Darius Alpha, you had to purchase both the Hue card and CD-ROM versions of Darius Plus. Both games came with a coupon. You sent these coupon in and they held a drawing. The first 800 names that were picked got the game. It actually cost about $1,000 when it actually pops up on the auctions. So those were all the games that were released for the SuperGrafx. NEC did announce the Power Console, which was an add-on for the SuperGrafx system, which basically gave you flight stick controls. It looked quite impressive. Photos were released of the unit, so it at least made it to the prototype stage. Lastly, one of the ports that was announced for the SuperGrafx was Strider. Unfortunately, this one never came out. The tale of the SuperGrafx Strider port is quite interesting. There's this great website called the Light Sword Cipher Mainframe, which is a great site for all things Strider. They try to separate some fact and fiction from this unreleased port. When the SuperGrafx came out in 1989, Nintendo was enjoying a healthy market share of the video game industry because they had a virtual monopoly on third-party developers. However, Capcom, which had some huge arcade hits at the time, actually licensed out these arcade games to some of Nintendo's greatest competitors so that they could make their own home versions. Probably the best example of this was Sega, who bought Capcom licenses of games such as Forgotten Worlds, Ghouls and Ghosts, and Strider. I think the SuperGrafx definitely took a page out of Sega's playbook, as 2 of the titles released for the system are Capcom ports developed internally by NEC Avenue. Those 2 games were 1941 and Ghouls and Ghosts. Strider would have been the 3rd. So Strider was actually announced as one of the first SuperGrafx games, but it kept on getting delayed and delayed. First, it was going to be a SuperGrafx exclusive title, then it was going to be a hybrid title like Darius Plus, then finally it was going to be a Super CD title. When it was finally released in 1994, it was a CD-ROM that used the arcade card, and the port was actually less than stellar. Despite the fact that Strider was eventually released as an arcade CD, rumors still persisted about the SuperGrafx port, mainly because of screenshots shown in the Japanese magazine PC-Engine Fan, and then later in the American magazine Electronic Gaming Monthly. Unfortunately, to this day, no beta ROMs, EEPROMs, or anything of the SuperGrafx port of Strider have surfaced. Maybe it's locked away deep in the vaults of NEC Avenue or Hudson Soft, or maybe it was vaporware and it never existed. Maybe it's out there waiting for one of you to discover. Okay, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for watching. Happy collecting.